a retired pharmaceutical and biotech executive, and the top vote getter in the 2020 election. Sally Meadows has lived in Los Altos for 28 years. Wow, almost as long as I have. From her service on city commissions, planning and design review, she saw government in action. She chose to run for city council because, and this is a quote, "We need experienced and common sense leaders who have a vision for Los Altos today and also accept responsibility and stewardship for tomorrow." Sally is currently serving her 4th year on council as mayor last year, and we're looking forward to hearing her discuss her year as mayor of Los Altos. So thank you so much for being here, Sally, and please join me in welcoming her this morning. We really appreciate your spending time with us. I'm going to ask you some questions, and then we'll open it up to the attendees to ask you additional questions. Although you were aware of how local government functions, and this one is kind of like your time on the council, not so much as mayor, but you were aware of how local government functions from your service on city commissions. Was there anything that surprised you about being on council?
Well, firstly, let me say thank you for inviting me. Now that I'm not mayor, nobody wants to talk to me. They all want to talk to Jonathan. So that's sometimes a good thing, I will say. But I do appreciate the opportunity to come here. And everyone is very good about declaring when they're here in their personal capacity. I'm here in my personal capacity to talk about my time as a council member. So I guess that's kind of a hybrid. So I just wanted to put that out there first. But in terms of, so when I was running for council nearly 4 years ago, I had spent 8 years on city commissions, as you had mentioned, both design review and planning commission. And so I said, and it was true then, and I think it's still true now, that I really had the experience to come into the job having watched our city government at work over 8 years, and have also learned a lot about particularly how one of the more complex topics in the city, how zoning and all that stuff works. So I did understand that part, but your question was, what wasn't I expecting? And it's public, but I don't think any of us, I certainly didn't appreciate how much council members do beyond just their straight city work. So we all have various assignments. Some of those are outside the city on various regional boards or committees or commissions. And that really takes a lot of time. And so I've had some people say to me, well, that's self-inflicted. You stepped up for that. And to some extent that's true, but in other ways it's not, because particularly if we're a partner in a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, we have to assign a council member to represent us on that JPA. And we're actually a member of a number of JPAs, including the library, as Freddie knows, and Silicon Valley Clean Energy is a JPA, et cetera. So we don't really have the option of council members not stepping up to do these roles. And so frankly, most of them that I've done have been very interesting. You learn a lot, but not only do you serve on those boards, but sometimes you get put on their subcommittees. So I can spend as much time on some of those type of works, which is representing our city, but is not necessarily, I mean, it's all public, but the public doesn't usually follow this kind of thing. And so occasionally at the end of meetings, we'll report out that we've been doing these things, but we can easily spend at least as much time on some of those assignments as we do from what the public is familiar with, which is, do council meetings and do things within the city. So that was a surprise to me, plus all the emails. There's a lot of emails.
Emails. Well, thank goodness for email. At least you're not having to pick up the phone constantly.
Well, that's true.
Too, I don't know. So my second question is, what's different about being mayor versus being a sort of regular council member?
Yes, so on the Monday and Tuesday before a council meeting, I'm usually less stressed. So my husband can vouch that, to me, the primary and the most visible role of a mayor is to get us through our meetings as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I took that responsibility very seriously. In fact, it was one of my goals to try to help us have more efficient and effective meetings. And so I planned for that. I worked towards that. And I will admit, I would get a little tense ahead of that because no matter how prepared you are, you can't always predict how something's going to go. Preparation, of course, helps. So the big difference is that you're not just preparing for the technical content of the meeting, but you're preparing for and have the responsibility for leading the meeting. So that's a whole nother layer on top of your regular job, being responsible for content and focused on policy making.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sally, what do you consider to be the major accomplishments during your tenure as mayor?
Um, well, I have a list of things, and each of them has quite a bit of detail. So we can go through one by one if that works for you. I think some of these things probably won't surprise anyone, but I do want to sort of summarize it for folks here today. And clearly, one of the big accomplishments that took the whole year, well, it took more than the year, but the housing element really consumed 2023. So we submitted the first official draft in January. And then to our surprise, we had a couple revisions we had to make during the course of the year. So we had our first submission and then the two revised submissions after that before we were approved. And all along the way, we were very capably led by our development services director, Nick Zorns, who kept us on track for implementation even before we were approved. So as many of you know, because you're involved and you're very informed in what we're doing at council for the city, we had to go through, because we missed, technically we were late. Our approval was about a month later than the statutory deadline, which I believe was the end of May. And it took us actually it took us a couple months beyond that before we had our approval. And because of that lateness, HCD wouldn't put quotes around it. I'm putting quotes around it. We did submit in January, but because of that, we actually had to commit to getting some certain rezonings done within that first year, by December of 2023. Well, technically by the end of January, but that we would have otherwise, if we hadn't been late per HCD's definition, we would have had 2 to 3 years to get that rezoning done. So we saw, and I think the community, it was kind of an education for all of us because the community some members didn't pay that much attention to the housing element overall, but when it affected their neighborhoods where certain parcels were being rezoned, then they realized, oh my goodness, what is this and where did it come from? And so not only did we really bring the housing element itself through a public process, but many people didn't follow it. And so we had a public process for each of the rezoning. So that really consumed council's time. And if any of you look at council packets before the meeting, at the very end of the packet, you'll see the timeline of all the zoning things, all the programs we committed to in the housing element that we're working our way through. And you'll see the ones that are completed. And as I said, a number of those had to be completed by basically the end of last year, and what's in progress, et cetera. So we'll be managing to that timeline of programs we committed to. So that was one element. So Marie, I don't know if you want me to go on to each of the major
Sure.
things.
I think we have time, so go for it.
Yes, okay. So another thing that we did, I think has been very effective, and I'll tell you about it, is really aligning all aspects of the city behind council priorities. So that may sound obvious, and it may even sound surprising that we weren't necessarily doing that before. But what we, and when I say aligning the whole city, that means council focused on council priorities. That makes sense, obviously, but also the city manager's goals being aligned with council priorities, and that also means staff's goals, and the commissions aligned behind the priorities. So again, why that's important, and you might think, why weren't we doing it in the first place? I'll start with the city manager. The city manager, in reality, we discovered last year, had two sets of goals. So the city manager review process happens in mid-year. Generally, he joined us in July 2021. And so we'd been giving him a review and developing goals, but then council goes through its goal settings at the beginning of the year. We'd adopt priorities, and those became his goals too. So he had like 16 or 17 goals. Of course, there was some overlap between them. It's not like council priorities would have, they did overlap with what Gabe's goals were in the first place. But what we did last year was decide that we weren't setting his goals separately, but that when council adopted priorities, which we did in January of this year, under the mayor's leadership, those became the city manager's goals. So what that has done is streamlined the ability to resource what are very clear goals. It doesn't have 16 or 17 things he's managing to. We're very focused on safe routes to school, and that's one of the goals. And you'll hear that come up. And the other benefit to aligning behind council priorities is that the commissions can work from that too. So the commissions have work plans, and this year we just finished going through with each of the commissions. They were able to develop work plans based on what we had identified priorities. And if there were some extra things in there that may not have been a fit with council priority, the commissions got pretty clear direction that no, that wasn't something we wanted to the commission to spend time on. And the reason that's important is because if a commission is spending time on something, that takes staff time. But if it's not a priority for anyone, then let's use that resource to focus on our priorities. So I think that was, we've seen the fruits of that this year as we've talked to the commissions, but I think that was a simple but important change we've made, is to connect the priorities to all aspects of running the city. So I don't know if, I'll just try to go through some of the others more quickly. We did and that sort of talks about, we did a commission restructure. And part of that was exactly what I just said, which is sometimes the commissions weren't really doing what council would want. So part of that fits in with what I was just describing, but it also helped define roles and responsibilities of the commissions, and also make sure that the commissions, when they formed a subcommittee, which we're now calling an ad hoc subcommittee, it was going to be in compliance with the Brown Act, because we just had to be sure that the guidelines were clear, that we didn't have too much communication outside the commissions that would jeopardize Brown Act compliance. And I won't belabor that. And there's just another quickly implementation. We really focused on, the year before I was mayor, we had adopted a total compensation philosophy, and we were able to Gabe, particularly with our human resources group, really focus on implementing that. We're actually now, when we try to recruit staff, we get a lot of good qualified applicants. Staff morale has improved. I think one of we probably everyone on this call knows we're losing our chief in the coming month or so. But she's been able to utilize that to really get our police department fully staffed. So throughout our organization, morale is better. We're paying at market rate, and we're really getting some qualified people in, and that's helping us run our city more effectively. And lastly, I'll just mention that I think it was one of my personal goals to be sure that we tried to get through our meetings more efficiently and effectively. And I do think we did that. I got feedback throughout the year that we were able to cut some of the drama and just focus on really making decisions that were important for the city to move forward. So sorry, that sounded like quite a monologue. I apologize for that.
No, that was perfect. And I'm surprised that you don't want to just stay in council meetings till 2, 3 a.m. I mean, really, come on. But anyway, so I am glad you are doing things more efficiently and effectively as well, because when I watch on YouTube or whatever it is, the device that we're using now, or the service that we're using, the city is using, I cannot stay awake till 2 a.m. I just can't. So, and I don't have to because I'm not on the council. But anyway, it's really a pleasure to have a more efficient meeting from my point of view. And when you look back on your year as mayor, what were the highs and lows? In other words, what made you smile and what made you frown?
Well, I think we're one of the few cities in the peninsula that has parades. So I have to admit the parades are super fun. So I highly recommend the three between the pet parade, the homecoming parade, and of course the Festival of Lights. I mean, that was super fun. So that's a high point. Another thing that was really important to me, it's not necessarily something that folks here would find important, but I was really proud of the youth involvement that I tried to incorporate into council meetings, but also into my time in the community. So for those of you who watch council meetings, you'll know that I would occasionally have youth come in to read proclamations that were important to them in some way or another. So we had youth reading proclamations for Lunar New Year and MLK Day, and we I had for Hispanic Heritage Month. We had a young lady from Los Altos High School who came in, and I would read in English and she would read in Spanish the proclamation. So I think it was exciting for those youth to get exposed to city government. I mean, obviously that's not the decision-making part, but really getting them involved in our government. I had the opportunity to speak at the National Honor Society. So I went to Los Altos High School, and they were going to have their Honor Society elections for this school year, actually. So I did it last school year, and gave a talk about leadership. And afterwards, the young lady who had with the Honor Society who had invited me said, "We got the most people to step up ever to run for our leadership positions this year." And so I just find that very gratifying. And any time the youth papers, that we have an independent youth paper in addition to the high schools each having their own newspaper. But if they reached out and wanted to do an interview, I participated. So I mean, the youth are our future. So whether we get them involved in government or at least know that their government is accessible to them, to me, that was super rewarding. And of course, all community events, you're invited to everything as mayor. And I couldn't do everything, but it was just really rewarding to see all that goes on in our community. I feel that we're so fortunate, and thank you to you all for being part of these organizations and things that really lift us up.
Thank you for that, Sally. You mentioned the police department and how they're using or the chief is using the updated human resource philosophy to improve staffing there. But what about the rest of the city? How are things going with staffing for the city in general?
We're, as I probably alluded to, I mean, we just have a much better response now to postings when we have to fill positions. I think, I don't know what our turnover rate, I suspect it's probably a little less than it was, though frankly, every city has turnover. So it's not like you're ever going to be down at zero. But we really are getting good response. From what I understand, staff morale is high. I think they've instituted recognition and events for all staff to get together. And I think that from what I can tell, and I'll explain that in a minute, everything is really going well. So when I say what I can tell, as everyone knows, and sometimes it's harder to focus on this, but council doesn't manage staff, right? That's the city manager's job. So when I say from what I can tell, it's because I'm not in there. None of council, I believe, is in there trying to manage staff. That has happened in the past. I think we're very focused on that distinction now. And so, but I'm not in there trying to get staff to do what I want them to do. That's all in the bailiwick of the city manager. And I think everything's going well.
Thank you. Last year, the new community center, I'm not sure how long we can call it new, but anyway, can you give us an update on how things are going with the currently with the community center?
Yes, so we opened the community center in October 2021 on a very hot day. For those of you who were there may remember, it was sweltering hot. And so it's that's 2.5 years in operation now. And of course, the first year or so, it took us a little while, I think, to get things going. We were still coming out of COVID at the time. Well, maybe we'll be forever coming out of COVID. I don't know, hard to know. But so the community center has really turned out to be such an asset for our community. So first of all, we mentioned this when we talked to the Financial Commission recently. I know there was a lot of angst on the part of some members of the community at the time about the budget and all this, but the community center came in on budget, technically under, but I'll just call it on budget, not to quibble. And sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. And by that, and I'm saying that because we got on our loan, we got such a low interest rate that nobody in the city, including the Finance Commission, wants us to pay off that loan because it's at like 2.25, 2.125, something very, very low. It's almost free money. And it enabled us to finish the community center. And we couldn't come close to that now. As everyone knows, the cost of capital is so high. So we were able to bring this community asset into the community on budget with the loan that we have at a very favorable interest rate. And so, as I said, we didn't know interest rates were going to go up the way they have. But so sometimes, as I said, better to be lucky than smart. And the community center now, and I think probably everyone here has been to many events in there, but it's heavily utilized both for city events and community events. I've seen I've seen people turn the Grand Oat Room into like a Disney adventure, themed party. There's holiday celebrations, there's family celebrations. We've hosted various regional meetings there. It's helpful for council members if you want to participate in a regional meeting, but here locally, you can post the agenda in one of the rooms there. And we often hold, staff will often hold community meetings there, or we have commission meetings there. So this has really turned out to be an asset for the community. And I think we're still growing into it, but I feel very fortunate that we have that.
And so do many members of the community. As I was telling you the other day, I was talking to someone recently who thought that it's just a terrific asset for the city and loves the newness of the building. It still seems new to me, but. And I also see people using the outside a lot for small meetings, sitting sort of undercover, so that you can do it even if it's raining, which it has been a lot lately, thank goodness. But that's really a nice extension of the building, I think, to be able to use that for, small informal meetings that one might have with 3 or 4 other people.
Well, the goal was to have it with a lot of flexible spaces, which it does, and you mentioned some of them. But also, I think it'll be even more increasingly used by the community when we have a cafe that opens up in there. So we'll learn more about that. I'm hopeful that that will happen sometime this year. If you can actually show up there and get your cup of coffee and a little snack, so that'll be something to look forward to.
That's nice. Before we turn to questions from the attendees, do you have any closing thoughts or remarks, Sally?
Yes. So I want to say that the way I approach being on council, and that as a council member, my main job is to be an advocate for our community as a whole, for the city. We have many groups in the community who, of course, advocate for their own groups, whether their interest be, having a dog park or the apricot trees or the library. And I'm just focused on the Civic Center right now with my examples, but that applies regardless of whether these are, and people can advocate for their passions. That's democracy, and we appreciate the passions. That's why we have so much in the community. But the council is advocating for our community overall. And we have to find a way, and what I believe this council has done a good job of, is finding a way to share the resources across all of our community. So I'm going to talk about the dog park for a minute as an example. I don't have a dog. I don't need a dog park. That's me personally. But as a council member, we have a community that I've heard some people use the word that we have 40% of our residents have a dog. I don't know if that's right or not. I think most people don't get their dog's license, so maybe it could be 60% or more. But whatever, there's a significant portion of our community that has needs for an amenity. And so council's job, which isn't easy with with limited resources, is to find a way to accommodate all those needs. I'll talk about, swimming pool. One of the, we don't, and don't worry, we're not moving forward with plans for a pool, but in reality, if we could, there are people who would benefit in our community from a pool. We all love the library. The library is trying to expand its usable space through a patio project, but then, there's a hue and cry about whether it might encroach on a tree or two or whatever. And I know that Freddie will show us over the weekend that what the new designs are, and there's probably no encroachment, whatever. And that's not the right word, because encroachment is a technical word. I'm not using it in the technical sense, but we have to find a way, and council's job is to find a way for our community as a whole to have the amenities that we can get. It doesn't mean each of us has to love every single amenity, but council needs to try to balance the interests. So that is sort of my closing observation, that council is advocating for the community, and it's fine for community organizations to advocate for their organizations, but council really is focused on helping us all have the most we can with the limited resources that we have.
And I remember from your campaign that your slogan was, "It's about all of us." And so I'm happy to hear that you're really trying to implement that or make that a reality in our community.
And all council, the entire council is. I mean, we're trying to do that. It's not to say it's easy, or not to say that we can, as I said, no swimming pool coming forward. So the anti-pool people, relax. But it would be nice. We're trying to do as much as we can. And that is, I think, important for all of us. So I'll stop there. Sorry, that was long.
Well, but thank you so much for a great conversation. And I'm going to open it up now to questions from the attendees. So please remember to raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. And also 1 question per person, no speeches, please. Okay, Larry, you're up first.
Hi, Sally. So you're speaking to the local government junkies here, obviously, and but when I talk to other folks, friends, and so forth in the area, they're often less on top of things, and in a way, that's sort of a compliment to how things are going. I think things are basically okay, so they're not as immersed into it. Nevertheless, right, and we have all this openness and all these things and so forth. If you could pick one thing to get into a typical Los Alton's head that they don't understand, even though it may well be in meetings or published or whatever, but nevertheless, people don't know. If there was like one thing you could get into every Los Alton's head, what would it be?
It would be, because this inevitably is people's response. Oh my God, I didn't know about this. You did this in secret. You never did, so the one thing would be, every single thing council does, short of closed sessions, every single thing is done in a public meeting through a public process. And I understand if any individual's not aware of it. I mean, we get too much information, whether physical mail, email, whatever, and we don't focus on something till it affects us personally. But please know, it went through a public process. It's not a secret. It didn't come out of nowhere. Reach out and we'll help you understand what that process was, but it really did go through a public process.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Harry, you're next, and then Gary.
Thank you, Sally. So my question is around emergency preparedness, of course.
Really?
And I'd like to know your ideas on what council, city staff, and the community, Resilient Los Altos as a volunteer group, can do to get better traction for residents signing up for alerts. So emergency alerts are, as you know, done by the county on Alert SEC and by the police department on Nixle, or the city on Nixle. 2 ways that to get them both, you got to sign up for both, and they're complicated. We're not getting good traction. It's 10 or 15% of the residents, which is scary. And we're trying to get better traction. what can Resilient Los Altos volunteers, city staff, and council do in the next year to get this improved, in your opinion?
Well, we could send you around knocking on all the doors, Harry. I personally know someone who you got to get the alerts on their phone, and I don't have to tell them what's going on all the time anymore. So, it's something that's so simple, but as you say, it's hard to get traction. I mean, I recall if we have another police open house this year, you had a booth. If people come up, have the instructions there, even do it for them. I mean, maybe there's a flyer that can go out or something, or the city manager's newsletter. Compliance is really hard, particularly on emergency preparedness. I hear people want to focus on PG&E and them undergrounding their lines, but in reality, those of us who need backup power when the power goes out, it's our responsibility to go and buy that battery pack, So yes, we should get PG&E to be responsive, but we have accountability. So we can talk about it offline, but yeah, it's again, city manager newsletter, be there at the booth with the little flyer instructions, say, give me your phone. I'll do this for you right here and now. That's probably a way to get at it.
Great answer. Thank you, Sally. Gary, and then Ginny.
So Sally, given your campaign slogan that Marie reminded us about, stewardship for tomorrow, what's your top environmental priority?
Well, council chose to focus on on incentives. So, and I know there's some disagreement, and we'll look more closely at what Los Altos has done regarding emissions. But there's a lot of people, and frankly, when you look at REACH codes, it's affecting new building or major remodels. It's really just a very small proportion. The way to get an equally, if not greater, bang for the buck is to focus on incentivizing. So can we get people to do solar plus battery, or can we get people such as myself who has solar but no battery? Can we get more conversion to electric cars? I know the EV fair is coming up. And we have a great partner in Silicon Valley Clean Energy that has programs. So our focus this year is really saying, okay, here's where you can get some financial partnership, whether through probably through SVCE or something. And that's where you're actually going to be getting people who don't have to, who wouldn't be affected. The vast majority of people wouldn't be affected by a REACH code. So that's why council identified incentives as the way to focus for now.
Good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Gary?
That's a good one. Good answer.
So Larry, Harry, Gary, do we have Barry or Mary next, or who's next?
I noticed that
Ginny.
too.
We're going off, the rhyming thing.
Okay.
Ginny, you're up.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Sally, excellent talk this morning. It's nice to be able to say in front of a group of interested people how much we appreciate the efficiency that you brought to your meetings as mayor. I think that can't be overstated because it's unique. It isn't always true. People don't necessarily try to do a bad job, but you did an excellent job, and thank you. It is mid-March, and I'm just wondering, in this political year, if you have anything you'd like to share with the class about your plans for the future.
All right. Well, I don't have an official announcement today or anything. I really do feel that we've had an effective council over the years I've been on it. I'm not claiming the credit for that. I mean, I'm one of the whole team. And you know what? Since Jonathan and I were elected, not a single council person has missed a single council meeting.
Well,
We've all been there for every meeting. That shows you the commitment of every single member of the council. Part of that was because half the time we're imprisoned in our homes and, lockdown, but that's not really true. I mean, we're very committed. I am still committed to the city, and I'm sure within the coming days to weeks, I would have something to say in answer to your question, Ginny, but I am and will remain committed to the city.
thank you very much.
Okay, Mark, it's your turn and you're the last hand up. So if anybody else has a question, now would be the time to raise your virtual hand.
Well, first of all, Sally, thank you so much for bringing your positive perspective and professionalism to the council. It's really needed. But my question is that if we have a beautiful new energy efficient theater downtown, would the city be able to find something to do with that space right smack dab in the middle of the community center where the bus barn currently sits?
Yes. I mean, if the question is really what would we do with the space, I don't know, boy, but think of all the possibilities to find some space. But I don't think that's your real question. Did you want to phrase what your real question is?
Well, I just, it's another plus that, the community center could use a little more space downtown. I think that would work out well. So it's part of the overall big planning and scheme of the city to do better and have more efficiency. That might just be one more thing for the council to consider.
Well, I'm sure the council will be considering that.
No plans yet, though, huh?
Well, I don't know the date. That would be a question for the mayor, but he's here in his personal capacity today, so.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
You can build a pool there.
I know, I almost said pool, but there's this, I wasn't going to go there. I was just using pool as an example, as something that we're not working on, unfortunately.
What about a skateboard park?
Well, that's another thing that, people have talked about all over time and all that, but we're not going to plan the space. Nothing worse than getting way ahead of the cart. So, Joe has a question.
Well, normally steering committee members, we don't ask questions, but since we have extra time and nobody else has raised their hand, I'll ask you, for the presidency, the Resolute desk, they leave a letter, well, traditionally, not always, for their successor. I'm wondering what advice you've given to Jonathan as you departed in terms of his mayorship. And of course, now the hands come up. So sorry for taking up the time.
Well, I'm not sure I had to give him any advice. I am very good about forwarding emails I receive that the mayor should deal with, though.
Free envelope. Okay, so now Ginny, Adine, and Larry have their hands up. Since Larry and Ginny have already asked questions, I'm going to go to Adine first and then come back around to and then Larry. Okay.
Hi, Sally.
Hello.
So my question is housing element related, and this is from the context of questions that we're getting from other cities, which is how can in this question, the three municipalities that I care about coordinate better on their housing element approach so that they're not necessarily doing something that's so independent and actually then doesn't line up regionally well, but how can they coordinate better?
I don't actually think, if you look at the three communities that you're referring to, Mountain View, Los Altos, and Los Altos Hills, I don't think our housing elements will be anything alike. We're very different communities in terms of the landscape. Where I think the coordination should happen, and HCD, if you're listening, I think that their process needs some work, so that there should be some rules, so that if they ask us something, the first time they get our application, they should ask us questions and we should do our best to answer them. But the second time and the third time, they shouldn't think up new questions. We should get the first time, is their, you know, they should ask us what they need to ask us. We should address it. And then if we haven't addressed it adequately, that's fine, but don't come up with new questions. So I think we as various jurisdictions can coordinate to give HCD a message about the process and what could make it more smoothly. But should we coordinate with Los Altos Hills or with Mountain View? You know, about our individual elements? I don't think so. Very, very different landscapes in each of our 3 cities.
Interesting perspective. Okay, Ginny, you're up.
Oh, thank you.
Want to wait?
Yes, Sally, as a council member, the work goes to Gabe. You set the policy and the work goes to Gabe, but the community comes to you for answers more than we go to Gabe in a natural way, it seems to me. And you can refer us to staff. But my question has to do with Grant Park, the facility there. Is that on the coming to-do list, the improvements down there? I've been seeing it periodically, but I'm not sure what the plan is. Can you speak to that at all today? Just to
It's budgeted. I don't recall the specifics. It's in there. It should be you know, either this year or next year. But yes, it's in there. You'll see it again during the budget. It's not an item that council needs to deal with now because we've budgeted it. So it's up to staff to implement when those changes are happening. But that is a question that we can ask Gabe to give us an update on.
having to do with the capital improvements of the building?
Yeah, we'll see it when the budget, it's in the budget already. We put it somewhere in there last year. Again, I can't remember off the top of my head this year or next. And we will see it again when that comes forward to us in a couple months.
Thank you.
Okay, Larry, and I think you're going to be the last question.
Okay, so Sally, you mentioned about your overflowing inbox, all the emails that come from folks. And I guess leaving out the opportunity to inherit Bitcoin from a Nigerian prince, maybe you could tell us something about like what the pie chart of topics look like, what's coming in, what's got people's attention.
Well, so you're talking about actual residents. I mean, the inbox is often overflowing with junk that is no relevance to council, but we get it anyway. See, the mayor is nodding down there. We get things about our website could use their help and this, that, you know, all the service providers. So there's a huge amount of junk mail from service providers that we have we're not going to take one of these emails and run off to the city manager and say, oh, these people will fix our website. But if you're asking about what is the community asking about, basically the same questions you're hearing right now. I think last year there was more focus on, again, some of the rezoning, and that we're not hearing as much about now because we're implementing different parts of the housing element now. So sorry, nothing particular. I know I'll come up with it as soon as we log off the Zoom, but you know where to find me.
Thanks.
Everybody knows where to find you, huh?
Yes, the safe way.
So it's
Andronica's.
It's almost 9:30, but before you go, a few announcements. Our next meeting will be on Friday, March 22nd from 8:30 to 9:30 via Zoom. Please join us for a discussion entitled Imagine a Park on Parking Plaza 1. That's the one that's located behind the post, with Nick Zorns, Director of Development Services, and Anthony Carnesecca, Assistant to the City Manager for the City of Los Altos. If you would like to be added to the LACC mailing list, please send an email to info@losaltoscommunitycoalition.org, and Kim has posted in the chat that information for your convenience. As always, a big thank you to Los Altos Mountain View Community Foundation for providing LACC with financial and in-kind support. Thanks again to Sally for a great conversation. Thank you. And we'll look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to serve.